Alors, bon, bienvenue à la dernière séance du séminaire qu'on a organisé avec Nicolò, Palazzetti et Lombi. On est très heureuse que vous soyez ici. On est très heureuse d'avoir 3 performeurs et 4 performeurs qui sont venus de l'Italie, du Royaume-Uni, de l'Australie pour la dernière séance. C'est une séance consacrée à la danse. Nicolò va faire une petite présentation et après présenter les intervenantes. On aura une petite pause entre donc, première 2 interventions, petite pause, dernière intervention. Et après, vous êtes tous conviés à un petit pot au CRAL qui est juste à côté, on ira tous ensemble. Je pense que c'est tout. Le séminaire continuera l'année prochaine. Donc, on vous enverra des nouvelles. Je vais vous faire passer le cahier pour que vous signiez tous. Et là, on va se faire switch English, je pense.
Yes.
Okay. So I leave you with Nicolò and have a good session.
Okay. So I will present the title of our session. I will speak in English because the most part of our speakers came from English-speaking country. So the title of our session is Dance as Experience, and this is an explicit reference to John Dewey. Art as Experience, published in 1934, is one of the major contributions to aesthetics in the 20th century, and is a good starting point for a session on contemporary dance, corporeal presence, and embodiment. According to Dewey, humans are living creatures interacting with an environment, and art and daily life, according to Dewey, are not separated. So, Art as Experience, this title, the original title of Dewey, has a double sense. First, art as experience means that art is seen in terms of experience, i.e. the core of aesthetics is not constituted by artworks or by a creative genius, but mainly by experiences. Second, the opposite one, so experience as art, i.e. some experiences are art. Not each experience is art, but only an experience, as Dewey say. A unified experience accomplished by a human interacting with an environment and its expressive objects. So there is a reference also to the thought of Darwin. So the thought of an artist could be embodied in some expressive objects as a consequence of his experiences. So we have the artwork as a consequence of experience, and our experiences as a public can reactivate the artwork with another experience. This idea of Dewey has a strong influence on many art movements during the 20th century, for example, abstract expressionism, happenings, body art. Nevertheless, after his wonderful premises on living creatures, artistic experiences, and so on, Dewey's approach is highly conservative. In his description of the specific quality of each art form, Dewey completely overlooks photography, cinema, and also dance. And so, what is the relation between dance and Dewey? Even if dance is not considered as a specific art, like for instance music or sculpture, dance is a real paradigm for Dewey's aesthetics. According to Dewey, dance is fundamental in relation to other forms of art, both in a historical and in an ontological sense. More simply put, dance constitutes the prehistoric origin of other arts, and its medium, i.e. the living body, is the core of human creativity. First, dance expresses the essential human need to organize his existence according to the rhythm of nature. Indeed, Dewey says, dancing and pantomime flourished as a part of religious rites and celebration. Dance is not only related to the internal rhythm of the human body, but on the contrary, it is the human body that becomes the medium for shaping the universal rhythm of nature. Actually, this essential relationship between music and dance during prehistoric rituals is, according to Dewey, the consequence of the common ontological substance shared by all these arts, i.e. the living body. In fact, Dewey says that dancing and singing are automatic arts, since they have the human organism, the mind-body of the artist, as their medium. A unified mind-body, the expression of Dewey is mind-body and not body-mind, a unified mind-body is the first medium employed by humans to inform and to signify their existence. Dance is the perfect unified experience for a unified body-mind. The historical and ontological centrality of dance and mind-body nexus is present in the rest of the book. Some major concepts contained in art as experience, such as experience, rhythm, and form, are described by Dewey, making implicit reference to dance and to the living body. For instance, the experience is described as an accomplished movement, and the form is described as a performance. This theoretical paradigm of art as experience may be inspired by the work of Frederick Alexander. In fact, Dewey makes the introduction to an important book of Frederick Alexander for the Alexander technique, or maybe was inspired by the American modern dance, such as Martha Graham, that was performed a lot of in this period in USA. This paradigm is not explicitly recognized by Dewey. Nevertheless, his legacy is crucial for a seminar dedicated to contemporary dance and corporal presence. If the mind-body of humans is a dancing living body, our title now could be, if we have, Dance as Art as Experience. And it is not a coincidence that during the writing of Art as Experience, the art collector Albert Barnes, the strongest influence on Dewey aesthetics, commissioned to Henri Matisse a huge triptychal mural for his art foundation. The name of the murals was La Danse. So now we will start with Nalina Waite. Nalina Waite is a Sydney-based dance artist and academic. She has performed internationally in several works of choreographers, but also performance artists such as Marina Abramovic and Johan Jonas. Nalina is the author also of a long list of choreographic works, and she is also a PhD candidate at the University of New South Wales, Australia. Her chapter, Consciousness Embodiment in Improvised Performance, is to be included in a volume published by Oxford University Press. And I want just to say that for Nalina, movement is just a consequence of dance. Actually, the core of contemporary dance is the somatic intelligence. As a result, by drawing on Susan Lake Foster's notion of embodied consciousness, Nalina investigates the corporeal knowledge of improvised dance. So.
Thank you very much. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Désolé, je n'ai pas les français. I'll continue in English, but ask me if you have any questions. Okay, so improvisation as a mode of performance emerged from a field of work in which kinaesthesia and the imagination are linked. In the West, this work was spearheaded in the mid-20th century by San Franciscan dance artist Anna Halpern, whose fascination with experiential anatomy was fostered during her study of dance at the University of Wisconsin under Margaret Douglas. Halpern later taught her methods of improvisation to Simone Forti, Trisha Brown, Yvonne Rayner, who then joined other members of the Judson Dance Theatre in rethinking the ontology of dance in 1960s New York. I'm sure you all know this, but I will just give us a little context. They were among other artists in New York at the time who were taking a keen interest in Eastern philosophy and associated body-mind practices such as Aikido, Zazen, Tai Chi, Hatha Yoga, among others, as well as Western somatic practices developed in the late 19th and early 20th century, such as idiokinesis, the Alexander technique, and Feldenkrais. Somatic practices focus conscious awareness on the information circulating in the sensorium, which is understood to affect the processing and computation activities of the brain, creating a two-way flow and unified system. In the 21st century, the influence of somatic practices has precipitated a widespread rejection of commodification of movement in contemporary dance internationally, as well as an expansion in the field of movement research and improvised performance. In identifying what is at the heart of this field, dance theorist Erin Brannigan argues that while Andre Lepecki might identify movement as the key issue, I prefer to believe that the exploration of somatic intelligence lies at the core of the discipline of dance. Brannigan defines somatic intelligence as a model of experience that places the body at the site where feelings or sensations are registered. Feelings that may be untranslatable into language or any other medium, but which accumulate as corporeal knowledge. Over the past 70 years, the humanities have worked to reposition the body in language as a site of knowing. Yet a persistent problem for dance theory is the articulation of corporeal knowledges, especially those that resist language. Theorizing the corporeal knowledges of improvised dance is especially elusive, because not only does each artist approach their practice differently, but an individual artist's practice can shift daily and from moment to moment. The corporeal knowledge of how an improvisation is composed is slippery, and yet it is this knowledge that allows an improviser to enter a space and create a dance from nothing. Susan Lee Foster suggests that composing an improvisation, and I quote her, depends on the performer's lucid familiarity with the principles of formal composition. But the lived experience of composing an improvised performance evokes another kind of labour, specific to improvisation, in which the somatic intelligence of the improviser directs or is directed by the forces that emerge between the self and others, within a specific space and time. This experience reframes the idea of composition from one based on a formal logic to one based on fluctuating, formless intensities. Foster uses the term embodied consciousness to describe that which enables the making of the dance and the dancer's making of itself. This paper builds on Foster's term by examining what the practice of embodied consciousness can offer improvisational composition theory by examining how it operates in the body-mind of the individual improviser, and how embodied consciousness can increase somatic intelligence, essentially. Therefore, rather than thinking of improvisation as something which is reliant on formal composition or on the spontaneous emergence of inspiration in the moment, this paper suggests that embodied consciousness is the way that the body-mind of the improviser can be tuned so that it can channel, direct, and be directed by the forces which compose the improvisation. So, in the general sense, embodied consciousness involves a somatic approach of observing and sensing where movement originates from, how that movement is initiated, and how that action unfolds in relation to time, space, and the effort used. When moving, kinaesthesia, or proprioception, is perceived through the sensorium. So it's a network of receptors and processing centres for the sensory modalities. And it's processed in the region below the cerebral cortex, the subcortical level of the brain, which means it usually goes unnoticed during our everyday activities. Embodied consciousness brings conscious awareness to what can otherwise be unnoticeable bodily sensations. Now here I propose a further bifurcation of embodied consciousness that I have found both commonly reoccurring and crucial to my own improvisation research. These two approaches are what I call thinking through the body, which is active, and the awareness of the body's mind, which is passive. These approaches are more accurately described as different types of embodied consciousness, distinguished here by their active and passive states, although they are not entirely active or passive, but contain fluctuating elements of both states simultaneously. Through the practice of rigorous sensorial self-observation, I've noticed that by enhancing my capacity to switch or slide along a spectrum of gradients between these two approaches, I'm able to activate my awareness of how I can actively direct or passively be directed by the forces shaping improvisation. So the first one, thinking through the body. Thinking through the body is used regularly in improvisational methodologies, but it's also the way that many corporal knowledges of dance are practiced. It can include language-based thoughts. To a certain extent, it's the methodology of mimetic training. It operates when a dancer is able to physically, mentally adjust their movement pathways or position to correctly perform a specific technique using their kinesthetic perception or response to language-based thought cues. A primary way that many different improvising artists across a broad spectrum of a broad aesthetic spectrum think through the body is through the use of tasks. For example, William Forsyth has developed improvisation technologies. Deborah Hay and Lisa Nelson both use scores. Steve Paxson has compiled the principles of contact improvisation. So tasks are directives that can be used imaginatively to set restrictions or limitations on movement in order to cultivate a specific quality. This is achieved by approaching movement as an inquiry, by exploring what the possible approaches to the task might be. There is no limit to what types of tasks can be used to create movement, although improvising artists are often very specific about the tasks they use. Some of the example of a task I might use could be swinging the bones, pressing the skin surfaces, leading through the ends, falling upwards. It's unlimited. As a task is essentially a linguistic directive embodied imaginatively, it needs to become known corporally as a concrete sensation, which involves a self-reflexive dialogue between the sensorium and language-based thinking. Self-reflexive dialogue helps an improviser to perceive any gap between what the task specifies and what is actually happening in the body. For example, a body-mind dialogue about swinging the bones may include asking questions while dancing, such as, which bones am I swinging? What does it mean to swing? Is what I'm doing really swinging? And by that I mean, am I allowing the forces of gravity, breath, and momentum to actually swing the weight of my bones? Or am I adding muscular force to illustrate rather than actually swing the bones? Yeah? So this example seems heavy in language-based thinking, but actually the self-reflexive dialogue is felt thought through the sensorium, and only occasionally is this dialogue voiced cognitively. Yeah? Over time, the self-reflexive dialogue can transfigure the quality or the scope of the imaginative body schemas that can change according to the dancer's engagement with the task. The schema, or map of the body, is what allows a person to know their own dimensions, their shape, and where they are in space. So a body schema can be extended deliberately in particular ways to include tools or spatial ideas. For example, a driver's body schema is extended to sense how large the car is while they're reversing into a car park. a blind person can feel the objects that surround them through extending their body schema into their cane. Similarly, an improviser can change the perception of their dimensions as well as shift the quality or texture of their movement through the use of tasks. So cultivating a concrete sensation through self-reflexivity requires considerable practice over time, and it can involve working with a broad range or types of tasks in order to deepen the physical mental understanding of what the task requires. Whatever task is used to focus the movement investigation, it must be deeply established in the body schema through the self-reflexive process described earlier, so that the investigation is based on a kind of tangible sensation. There's also great potential for this practice to promote innovative movement material, because even if a task appears to only suggest a singular response, swinging the bones, through self-reflexive dialogue, this and any other assumption is interrogated. So, what bones? The skull. You can question these tasks in many ways, because it's not a process of getting it right, but finding creative ways to engage with movement as an ever-changing inquiry. What is important about the use of tasks as a method of improvisation is that they can support the sustainability and or the transformation of a movement investigation over time, which requires and also develops a certain endurance of attention, which I'm asking you to do today. So, the labour of negotiating a task while improvising involves continually refreshing one's attention to the task, approaching it as if it were the first time, every time, and all the time. When an improviser becomes habitually self-reflexive, the dialogic process can occur extremely quickly, and sometimes effortlessly. But it is the specificity with which improvisers attend to the task that enables improvisation to become a virtuosic choreographic methodology. Therefore, rather than arising from spontaneous inspiration, a sophisticated improvisation practice can follow an extremely rigorous and technical methodology which can be refined over time. Thinking through the body offers an improviser a way to extend the range of possible movement investigations through a process of focused limitation. Some possible categories of tasks are those that are qualitative, such as movement textures, effort, or tonality, tone of movement. Dimensional, to do with scale, space, time, mathematical or conceptual ideas. Relational, to do with imagining relations between people or spaces or places. Or poetic, responding to words, images, ideas, sensations. Complex tasks also have the potential to extend the conception of the body schema in ways that might defy logic or physiological limits, but produce an engaging shift in the movement quality of the body of the improviser. A task such as no body part can touch the floor may not be literally achievable, but it creates a quality of urgency and levity in the body of the improviser's attempt to produce it. For example, Trisha Brown describes her improvisation score for Trillium, 1962. I quote her here. She says, "Working in the studio on movement exploration of traversing 3 positions of sitting, standing, and lying. I broke these actions down to their basic mechanical structure, finding the places of rest, power, momentum, and peculiarity. I went over and over the material, eventually accelerating and mixing it up to the degree that lying down was done in the air." Quite nice. Tasks that are movement puzzles or conundrums have the potential to be particularly engaging for an improviser, as they demand a heightened state of body-mind engagement, or what Foster calls hyper-awareness. The use of tasks enable an improviser to sustain hyper-awareness by negotiating the tension between performing the task and considering alternative approaches to it that might offer opportunities to further extend the investigation. As was stated earlier, the practice of self-reflexive dialogue is a way of tuning the body-mind instrument that it can become a methodology for producing movement, even if there is no task to enact. Because approaching all movement with hyper-awareness as an inquiry charges the performance with a heightened quality of attention. The second type of embodied consciousness is what I've called the body's mind. It's more elusive than thinking through the body. It is when the language-based voice of thinking is quiet enough that it's possible to observe the mind of the corporality, which is revealed as an intention within the flesh. Through the somatic activity of releasing muscular tension, physical mental attachment to cortical cognition can be relinquished, allowing the body's mind to be perceived. What is specific about this type of embodied consciousness is that it does not occur in a language-producing state. Phenomena that is perceptible at this level of the body's mind are ideas which are felt rather than thought, including fragments of memory, sensations, emotions, images. These felt ideas can occur in the form of an inner song or story that arise in one's corporal awareness. These songs are not necessarily sensed orally, but are felt through the compression and release of the breath and the subtle shifts in the tonus of the flesh. Similarly, the stories may not have a narrative per se, but are rather experienced as body-mind sensations that unfold in a kind of a journey through a sensory landscape. These sensations can become threads of interest when listened to, providing a corporeal source of material and of a compositional structure. When being moved by the body's mind, there is no need for self-reflexive dialogue, because the cognitive mind's authority dissolves. The only task is to listen to and allow the intention of the body-mind to be expressed. These thought feelings that the body-mind needs to express are felt as desirous and intentional sensations of the flesh. For example, the strong urge to suddenly curl inward or leap. These sensations are tangibly experienced and may also form a sense of an extended or qualitatively different body schema, but the source of the sensory ideas arise in the corporality. So I didn't write about Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, but she talks about these, our life experiences that are stored in our flesh and they need expressing. It's a bit too much to go into just at this minute, but thought I should mention it. This type of embodied consciousness requires a very different kind of labour. Primarily, it requires 1, a state of receptivity, 2, the capacity to be aware of any physical and mental resistance, and 3, the physical mental bravery to relinquish the subtle habit of cortical control and resistance. I say bravery because giving oneself over to be danced by the forces circulating within the body-mind and or space and time is a very different sensation to the cortically dominated experience of everyday life. If an improviser can get out of their own way, there is a possibility to be surprised by what emerges. Once resistance is relinquished, impulses can propel an improviser into a course of action without knowing where that action might lead, so that the improviser discovers the action with the audience as it's happening. The expression of the body's mind is a kind of golden moment that improvisers hope for, where the desire of the body-mind becomes the fuel that sparks intention and action to occur simultaneously. Somatic practices are very beneficial to this type of embodied consciousness because they offer a methodology for the passive activity of yielding and the subtlety of listening to the body's mind. The labour here is very subtle because the cognitive voice of thought can easily pull an improviser's attention away from the perception of the phenomena towards a conceptual idea. The core of this undisciplined discipline of consciously embodying the body's mind is to suspend a state of subcortical awareness, not through resisting cortical cognition, but through relinquishing it, allowing the somatic intelligence of the body to be heard. Both types of embodied consciousness operate in a constant state of flux during an improvisation, each providing currency at different moments in the dance. Although some methods of improvising, of course, prefer one method type over the other. As these types of embodiment operate on different levels of consciousness, the distinction between them is subtle. They've become known to me and therefore identified here because I've observed and investigated and now employ the bifurcation of embodied consciousness in my practice. For example, by engaging with the task, I can activate the curiosity of my body-mind to think through the body to attend to a movement puzzle through embodied cognition. At other times, I passively allow the desire of my body's mind to be the source of the dance, and my cognitive awareness slips back and swims in sensorium. Describing the bifurcation of embodied consciousness seems to suggest, falsely, that the way these states fluctuate is straightforward or somehow obvious. In fact, this short analysis isolates only a small section of what is actually a highly complex matrix of interconnected elements that situates the individual body-mind of the improviser within a much broader context of space and time and others. I've just focused on this to try and get to the detail of it. Yet, at the level of the individual body-mind, the hyper-awareness of thinking through the body creates a situation, a kind of a framework, to then support the desire of the body's mind to ebb and flow or surge as spontaneous inspiration. At times, for myself, my desire to move is amplified through the effort of performing a specific task in an innovative way. At other times, my desire for movement is supported by the pleasure of following the sensory melody of the shifting tonus of the flesh. At the level of the body-mind, composing an improvisation involves holding the tension between these two kinds of embodied consciousness, or fluctuating between them, to direct or to be directed by the forces that emerge in the space and time of the dance. Thank you very much.